What if your wellness journey starts on the toilet? Too much? Not for today's guest. I sat down with Lee Reitelman, co-founder of Plant Paper, to talk about something we all use but rarely question: toilet paper. From hidden toxins to supply chain secrets, Lee breaks down why the paper we don't talk about is a powerful lever for environmental and personal change. We get into sustainability, design, product storytelling, and the beautiful, awkward art of challenging what people take for granted. Whether you care about clean living or bold entrepreneurship, this episode reminds us to build well, we have to start with what we usually overlook. And if you're into these conversations and more that explore the art of building well, please subscribe. I hope you enjoy this one. I'm Allison Dean. I've scaled companies, led global teams, and I'm a lifelong student of well-being. And yes, motherhood is part of that curriculum. After years partnering with visionary leaders, I know the future belongs to those who create with care. Welcome to the Dean's List. More than a podcast, this is a community of thoughtful founders, creative minds, and conscious consumers. If that's you, congratulations. You're already on the list. Welcome to the Dean's List, where we explore the art of building well. I'm your host, Allison Dean, and today we're turning to one of the most overlooked categories in wellness: personal paper goods. Joining me is Lee Reitelman, one of the co-founders of Plant Paper, a company reimagining what it means to design for health, sustainability, and the rituals we rarely think twice about. I've been a customer for 3 years, and I am very excited to unpack how they've brought this mission to life through product, storytelling, and leadership. Lee, so happy to have you here.
Very, very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. All right. So for anybody that perhaps has not seen the Instagram ads or who may not know, what is Plant Paper?
Plant Paper is a tree-free, toxin-free household paper goods company. Our core product is toilet paper. We've, in the last year, expanded to facial tissue as well. And we have some other exciting household paper extensions coming up, but most people know us for our toilet paper.
That's how I found you. Beyond the product itself, what do you feel like you're really building with Plant Paper? Like, what is it trying to heal for all of us?
It's a great question. First of all, I should add that, we are at this point primarily a direct-to-consumer company. We have at this point, I can hardly believe it as I say it, but about 70,000 households across the country that are subscribers. And the subscription aspect of our business, it's, I would say, a really central part of our offering, in as much as we're not just trying to get people to try something new one time and say, hey, this looks interesting. We're trying to actually build a new habit and create a new relationship, not just with our product, but with the very act and the category of toilet paper, of going to the bathroom and wiping and all of that. It's a category that has been sort of overlooked, pushed aside, as many other products in the bathroom, in the kitchen, elsewhere in the home have been given lots of love and attention and thought. Most people don't think that much about what toilet paper they're buying, how it's made, what's going into it, what the impact might be on the planet, on their families, and so forth. And I think the direct-to-consumer model and the subscription model is really well suited, especially in the early days of a business, for building a relationship and building a sense of meaning around a particular product and a particular practice, and a community that arises from that kind of shared sense of awakening. Hey, wow, this is something that I never thought about. And now, not only do I think about it, but I feel really good about it. I'm proud of it. And I feel this sense of sort of a shared mission with all of the other hundreds of thousands of people that have made the same choice and continue to make the same choice every time they get a delivery. So, what is it trying to heal? In short, we discovered early on in our process of developing the business, developing the concept, that conventionally made toilet paper was destructive on a number of different levels. The first and most obvious way is the environmental destruction that it causes. The vast majority of toilet paper sold in America is made in part or wholly from virgin trees And those trees typically come from Canada and from Brazil. At this point, those are kind of the two big places. And in Canada, they're looking for softwood, evergreen trees that grow in what's called the boreal forest, which is the sort of ring of forests that are around just below the Arctic Circle, and which are an absolutely critical line of defense against climate change. Scientists have long thought of them as the lungs of the planet. They store a tremendous amount of carbon. And mowing them down to turn them into a product that you use for a matter of seconds is just incredibly irresponsible and wasteful. Whatever the companies that do that, and there are many of them, and there's a good chance that product is in most people's bathrooms right now who are listening to this, whatever they say, there's really no way to sustainably work with those forests for a product like this. It's not to say that you can't, make use of those forests, but the way that it's done right now is nowhere near sustainable. And then on the other hand, you've got forests or trees that are supplying pulp from Brazil. Those are mostly eucalyptus trees, and they're grown on plantations, which are extremely carbon intensive, contribute to drought, soil erosion, all sorts of other bad things. A lot of those eucalyptus plantations stand where rainforests once stood. So from an environmental perspective, you could hardly really do worse for a product with such a short lifespan. So we go back to the question, we're trying to heal that. It's a major wasted opportunity, or just a major waste, that's how most people continue to wipe in America. Yeah. But the other part of it, which isn't so obvious, isn't so well known, is that the processing that is done to the wood fiber is extremely chemical intensive and energy intensive as well. But the chemicals are really concerning. I could spend too long going into the details of that, but suffice it to say that there are very real environmental harms that result from the use of those chemicals in the bleaching process, but also very real concerns for human health with the nature of the bleaching process, other additives like formaldehyde, scents, dyes, and then very concerningly also PFAS, forever chemicals, which are, as far as we understand, not necessarily intentionally added to toilet paper, but which find their ways in there in the manufacturing process. And I imagine that most listeners, viewers will have some familiarity with those chemicals, and they're really, really nasty, and they never break down. And basically, there is no safe threshold for exposure to PFAS. So, you might say well, why does it matter? I'm just wiping my butt or whatever for 2 seconds. Well, over the course of a lifetime, it's a lot of wiping. And when you're talking about a chemical that simply does not break down, it's all additive. Every single time you expose yourself to it, you are adding to the total. And there's nothing healthy and nothing clean about that. And that's another thing that we wanted to address.
It's pretty amazing. It's also kind of amazing just to figure out how to figure out the substitute for that though too, right? Because obviously even with bamboo, there needs to be some processing. So it's impressive that you were able to figure that out on top of everything else. So bravo,
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, it took a lot of work. I think the paper industry kind of presents it as there's really no other way to do this. We've already figured it out and this is the best way and there's no alternatives. But, the reality is if you study any large industry over the course of decades, they always present what they're doing right now as the gold standard. 30 years from now, they will be doing something different because someone or some group will have given them a very hard time about what they were doing before, and they will have to improve it. And obviously the tobacco industry was kind of the most extreme classic example where it's they knew for a long time and they pretend that, it's actually fine. And I'm not saying that it's exactly analogous, but I am saying that the alternatives are actually not so difficult to dream up, but they require changes to the supply chain, changes to the marketing, changes that are simply too expensive and annoying and difficult for a company of those scales to implement, because they're obviously, they have the shareholders and publicly traded and so forth. And they're just they're always guarding against any kind of volatility in the share price. And fortunately, when you're starting a business, you don't have to worry about any of that.
Right. What's one belief that you had to unlearn in order to create plant paper?
The belief, which was maybe less my own than that of a lot of the people that we talked to early on about developing this product, especially manufacturers, And that was the belief that people needed their toilet paper to be white.
Oh.
In the early days, when we started to ask people about making unbleached toilet paper, it was kind of like, okay, so is it for like gas stations? And we're like, no, it's definitely not for gas. I mean, hopefully it will be for gas stations one day, but no, it's not. It's for like real people to buy and put in their own bathrooms at home. And everybody said, well, there's no way. People love their white toilet paper and they're never going to get over that. And honestly, even in the earliest days of our getting samples and sending them around to friends, people are like, well, really used to the white stuff. And, there was some truth to what the manufacturers were saying. But we just had this feeling that could be unlearned. And I guess we knew that because we ourselves unlearned it. Like when we first got the initial unbleached rolls, we were like, it's different. But it didn't take very long. It took a week or 2 or 3 of using it. And then also obviously being steeped in all of the research that we were doing about why it shouldn't be white. Right. To say, hey, this is actually superior. Mm-hmm. And so first we had to unlearn that ourselves. Didn't take long. Second, we had to unlearn the assumption that other people would be attached to their white paper. And it took some time. But, at this point, I think we hear all the time from people who say, I can never go back to that stuff. I can't even look at it. And when I go into a bathroom at a friend's house, or if I go on a trip or whatever, I'm like, I don't want to use it because I understand, the alternative. That was a major unlearning.
Has there been a social media campaign around the white versus not white?
I would say in the earlier days, yes. What's funny is that as we've grown, we've gotten less and less pushback on that. Right. I think that the attitudes have actually started to shift, whether through our own doing, and I think that's probably part of it, but also just general attitudinal zeitgeist stuff. The mental infrastructure is there to be like, okay, I get why that's not white.
I'd be curious too, like for people that have like recurring UTIs or like recurrent like problems down there. Yep. When they switch, if it goes away.
We hear that all the time. One of the biggest sort of major motivating discovery early on in our research was this article, a study that basically linked the presence of formaldehyde in toilet paper to various forms of inflammation, like, genital vulvar inflammation particularly. And the study did not look at the mechanism of action, but it was fairly conclusive that like when these people who were affected by this switched to a less processed, unbleached brand, that the symptoms cleared up. What we discovered as we pushed further was that a lot of people have a sensitivity to formaldehyde. It's like a significant percentage of the population, like could be 10 or 15% of the population has like a very measurable sensitivity to it. And then there may be a much larger percentage that has like some low level sensitivity. And that's the thing. It's like one of the things that we've learned a lot about and thought a lot about is like there's levels or thresholds of exposure to a certain chemical or a certain thing that's maybe like a little irritating, which if you only encountered that thing once in a great while, wouldn't be that big of a deal. But toilet paper is not one of those things. You encounter it, your body encounters it in a very, very intimate way every single day of your life from here on out. The sort of presuppositions, the assumptions that are made about like, hey, well, it's just a little bit of this and it's not really going to impact. Well, every day times 3 or 5 is a lot of times over the course of a lifetime. We hear a lot about itching and discomfort and inflammation, and we hear about hemorrhoids clearing up. We spend a lot of our time researching these things, very versed in the world of hemorrhoids. And I think what's interesting with hemorrhoids is like you have this preliminary sort of wound. It's a vein that becomes kind of inflamed. And it's not exactly clear what causes the hemorrhoid in the first place. Like there's different causes for different people, and it's not always easy to draw a straight line. But what's pretty clear is that abrading the hemorrhoid with something that is in any way irritating is going to prolong the thing and not allow it to heal. And so you're dealing with an area, whether you're talking about female genital parts or butthole, these are like meant to be basically self-cleaning, especially women's parts. And the less you do, the less you add, the less new foreign stuff you add to that area, the better off you're going to be. And when it comes to the butthole, it's where the outside becomes inside. It's this sort of transitional moment. And you have to take care of it in a very different way than you would from, the skin on your palm or something. A long-winded and maybe overly detailed TMI type of answer, but that's the way we are.
We welcome the TMI. I think people just need to know, they just need to accept the reality.
Definitely. It concerns us all one way or another.
Exactly. Okay, so speaking of buttholes, what does wellness mean to you?
Wellness for me probably has a lot to do with balance, which in turn has a lot to do with sustainability. And I don't mean sustainability in the broad environmental sense, but I mean, can you keep doing the things that you want to do in the way that you want to do them for as long as you want to do them?
Right.
That is sustainability for me. I mean, as it applies to the individual. And in order to do that, you need balance. Because if you're unbalanced or imbalanced, you end up oscillating between extremes, fluctuating between extremes, and those extremes become more and more extreme over time. And so that definition in terms of mental wellness, in terms of spiritual wellness, in terms of dietary wellness, how do you find balance? How do you put yourself in a place where you're not constantly compensating for the last thing that you did, or where those compensations are within like a very narrow range such that you never get too far out of balance? That's the way I think about it right now. And it's probably a function of being in a business that has inherently a lot of ups and downs. Any business does. And being the parent of 2 small children. And that obviously can be destabilizing at times. So the outside world is very destabilizing for me and probably for all of us for any number of reasons. My goal at this moment is to basically like have a steady, balanced center. And that's what I'm trying to do in terms of my health, in terms of my mental health and so forth.
When you're in a state of balance, I think of ease and not disease, right? So I mean, I think that that's a beautiful answer. Can you walk me through perhaps a problem or an obstacle that you encountered early on with plant paper that ended up unlocking an opportunity or something you hadn't maybe originally anticipated?
Yeah, I really love that question. In our very early days, March of 2020, COVID hit.
Yes.
March 9th was sort of the date that sticks out in my mind. We were based in New York, and that's when my wife and co-founder and I both had COVID around March 4th or 5th. And at the time, Diva went to a clinic because she was really not feeling well, and they wouldn't even test her for COVID. Because at that point, it was like, we knew what it was, but it was like, nobody's going to have that. And then she lost her sense of taste and smell and all these things that like only a month or two later, everybody would have been like, obviously you have COVID. But at that time, nobody really knew. So we both dealt with COVID very, very early on. And then that week of March 9th, suddenly orders started coming in. And up until that point, we were selling like 3-4 new orders a day, like very, very limited sales. And suddenly things started picking up. And by March 12th, that was the day when like the floodgates open. And suddenly we had, 10, 20, 30 times that number of orders per day. And that was because, obviously people were hoarding toilet paper and all the grocery stores were sold out, but also because people didn't even want to go to grocery stores. And people were like, I don't want to leave, so I need to order toilet paper. And it created this really interesting opportunity for us because the psychology of buying toilet paper online is very different from the psychology of buying it in a store. Like in a store, you kind of want to get in and out of that aisle as quickly as possible. You're just looking for the name that you knock it into the cart and that's it. But when you're selling something to somebody online, there is an opportunity for a little bit more education, a little bit more of an interaction. And that kind of really suited our product, which is a kind of higher touch product that needs a little more explanation. Like, why is it this color and why should I buy this one? So that's all the prologue. We were very lucky. It was just weird timing that we were getting restocked from our manufacturer a week or two later. So it actually had already arrived at the port the week of March 9th, but it wasn't yet available to ship. We didn't know about like going sold out or how you navigate any of that. So all these orders just started flowing in. But we then realized, like, wait a minute, we actually don't have the product yet because it was supposed to go right to the warehouse, but it got stuck. So we had this roughly 2-week period where we were taking in all of these orders, many of them for subscriptions. Like people were just subscribing, even though they'd never tried the product before, because they were like, who knows when I'm going to be able to buy toilet paper in the store again? And having to communicate to them that we needed a few more days before we could fulfill the order. Mm-hmm. And this was incredibly stressful to us. We were like, all these people just ordered the stuff, and then we were telling them there's going to be a delay. And we really belabored what to do, how to communicate with them. Should we give them discounts? And in the end, we did give a lot of them really significant discounts. We were like, listen, like, we really, really, really want you to get this paper. And we feel really bad that this delay is happening that we didn't know was going to happen. We put so much work into thinking about, like, how can we keep these people excited about what we're doing and about the product that we're going to get? Yeah. And 5 years later, of those initial cohorts of subscribers from March, April, May of 2020, we still have like 60% of them as subscribers. Five years later. And this is like hundreds of people in each month. Right. And I think what I am getting at is that it was a crisis moment, but it sort of showed us that going the extra mile in your dealings with your customers, really, really taking every single one of their experiences really like personally and working to make sure that they're happy, that has been like the guiding light of our business ever since. And I think it's a big, big, big part of our success. And even to this day, with hundreds of thousands of customers, we still have one customer service person. And that person answers every single email. And anybody who's a subscriber who's ever had to make any change knows that person and has dealt with her. And she thinks of all of our customers as her responsibility, her family. And I think that whole mentality was forged in the crisis that was those early months of COVID.
I love that. I love that so much. I do think that now more than ever, consumers value the companies where there is a level of care that is felt. Lord knows I could share some stories right now. All too often, I think it's more feelings like, I never have to patronize that place again or use that service again or whatever it is, just because you're like, I didn't feel cared for in the way that I wanted to in the exchange of my resources for something. So that's a beautiful answer. Okay, so obviously personal paper goods, they touch very personal parts of our lives. What kind of role do you think that shame plays in how we interact with products like toilet paper? And I think specifically what I am also getting at is, how did that element inform some of your branding or some of your messaging choices? Because I found that you like humor, and I think that's interesting. And so curious what you have to say about that.
Shame has played a huge role in the way toilet paper has been marketed since its inception, which is, at this point, like 140, 150 years ago, though it really took off in the 1910s and 1920s, really with the birth of the modern bathroom, private bathroom. Prior to that, a lot of people had like an outhouse or something. It's a really interesting history. And there's a book for anybody who is like as weird as I am to be interested in this, called Wiped, by a person who's become a friend of mine now named Ronald Bloomer. And it's a history of, wiping. And he tells a really interesting story about how the theory of germ-based disease, which is like kind of 19th century, led to this obsession with hygiene and sanitation, which in many ways like had a lot of positive impacts and we all benefit from it. But as often happens, this pendulum kind of swung a bit far. And this was the birth of like the ultra white bathroom, because people were like, if the bathroom isn't like ultra white, then we won't be able to see the germs. But this was also corresponded to the rise of toilet paper and the obsession with that type of bodily cleaning, which has a lot going for it, but also, again, like has created some excesses as well. So to answer your question, from the beginning, all of the marketing around toilet paper was spoken euphemisms about what the product was, and it was often geared toward women as the sort of household toilet paper buyers. They didn't call it toilet paper, they would call it bath tissue. Scott tissue, which, still exists today, it was one of the big early ones. On the box, it said, don't say bath tissue, just ask for Scott.
Okay.
They were instructing you to go into the pharmacy and just point at the thing to sort of avoid even saying it, and therefore implying that you have a vagina or a butthole that needs to be wiped, which we all do,
Uh-huh.
So that's been there since the beginning. And, I think in its more modern incarnation, it's like bears talking about, oh, this is really soft and fluffy or whatever. But it's like, we don't want to own up to the fact that like, it's us, it's humans. We all have them, these parts. We all shit and piss and we have to clean ourselves. And it's just part of being human. Toilet paper advertising has just completely obfuscated that very foundational fact. And one of the things that we were excited about when we developed this company early on was pushing like really hard in the other direction, and kind of like getting people to say like, there is absolutely nothing shameful about the need to wipe. And in fact, the shame and the secrecy is part of what has allowed some of these big companies to do what they do without really much scrutiny for a very long time. And it's prevented us from like having serious conversations about which brands we're using and why we use them and how they feel and so forth. The shame thing is a major sort of launching pad for us. Like, hey, like, let's use that tension to make an impact and get people thinking about something in a new way.
Well, you've done a great job with that. I highly encourage everyone to check out the Plant Paper Instagram page. There's some pretty choice little reels that I've found quite enjoyable. So I think it's great.
The way that a lot of our marketing and imagery, the way people have responded and how it's been embraced sort of like just confirms the fact that like this was a total repressive complex for a long time in society. Yeah. And now, it's sort of like, hey, it's completely fine to talk about these things and depict someone on a toilet. Like that's kind of been like a thing that's sort of been a no-go. I mean, no toilet paper company would ever do that. It's like the last thing you want to do. And we've kind of shown that like, hey, it's actually okay. People are ready to see that,
I'm like wondering when Masterclass is going to reach out to you to teach one of the classes, because I was thinking of the canned water guy.
The Liquid Death?
Yeah, Liquid Death. He like entered into this kind of category that it was just there. Yeah. I feel like you're right for like a masterclass on this, Lee. Like, I think this is a good one.
Liquid Death is a funny one. I remember when I first saw it, I was like, this is so stupid. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but then like it worked on me, and I think probably most of all for me, because it was just like, in the last year or so, I've been started to become super conscious of eliminating my like plastic exposure. And I'm like, wow, I drink a lot of plastic bottled water. If I'm thirsty and I'm out, like I get it, because I don't want like a soft drink. I basically just want water, but it's always bottled. And then I'm like, oh, there's a Whole Foods or whatever over there. I know they're going to have Liquid Death. I could get the can, and it's like, I'm there now.
Yeah. And it's spring water too. So like, that's good for you. Like, it's not like purified crap. So that's good.
Totally.
All right. So speaking of, I guess, good packaging or compelling packaging, obviously the plant paper packaging and branding feel very intentional, elevated, but simple.
Yep.
So how did you all think about design as part of the wellness story?
For us, and this is not our idea uniquely, but it's certainly one that's very important to us. Good design is a tool for making it more attractive and appealing and easier to make choices that are better for you in some way. Sustainably oriented products have always suffered from a kind of widespread perception that they represent a trade-off in some way. It's like, yeah, it's better for the planet or whatever, but like, it's probably going to be a little bit of a step down quality-wise somehow. Less and less, obviously electric cars and so forth and hybrid vehicles. I think that perception is changing, but I think there's still a lot of that feeling that like, yeah, but like the artificial stuff is actually like better in some way, or, the less sustainable stuff is better in some way. And I think we felt like good design, and I don't just mean the packaging, I mean down to the product design too, could get people feeling differently about a product that they might otherwise have some resistance to. Like, how can you use the design to be like, I actually want to use that, not because it's sustainable, but because I like the way it looks, I like the way it feels, I like the way it performs, I like the thoughtfulness that went into that so obviously. So that's what I mean by design as a tool. It's sort of a back door, it's like try to bring people in through the sustainability angle, like, hey, do this because it's a virtuous thing. Like a lot of people are just right out of the gate going to be like, yeah, no thanks. But like,
Right.
leave that to the side and say, like, how do you make something that's beautiful? How do you make something that's appealing? How do you make something that's thoughtful? How do you make something that's better? Full
Yes.
stop. Again, it's true certainly at the packaging level, but also at the product level. How do you just make the toilet paper itself better? But yeah, I think to address your question more specifically, like toilet paper presented an interesting like challenge from a packaging standpoint and branding standpoint, because it's like you're making a very universal, very accessible everyday product. And I think the easier, maybe more obvious path would be like, if it's been something that we don't pay any attention to, how do we make it something that you have to pay attention to, like big, loud colors and prints and so forth? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. I understand the logic, but it wasn't what we wanted in our bathrooms. We wanted it to feel different and yet also to some degree disappear, where it's like, this is just part of the fabric of my life now. And I think that's really the impetus for the sort of whole brand identity, why it looks and feels the way it does, and why the packaging looks and feels the way it does. That obviously merged with what are the most sustainable materials, how do you use the least packaging, eliminate plastic, and all the rest.
It is kind of interesting when you say that, because now, I get like, the ginormous box that has all the boxes in it. But it is kind of interesting to think about, like, if you were to go into a restaurant and how some places, like, they have their stock, like, in front of you of toilet paper and stuff, how much more elegant it would be for you to just see the plant paper, cute little, like, totes on the shelf, It would look more, like, intentional, but still kind of blend in. So, okay, well, let's manifest some of that, because I would actually prefer when I walk into bathrooms for it to be plant paper and not the white stuff. So
we've got, I think, at this point, maybe like 200 or so restaurants, gyms, hotels that have gone there. There is probably nothing that I like more these days than walking into a restaurant and walking into the bathroom and seeing plant paper there and having had no idea that they were customers.
I feel like there should be a plant paper finder on the website so that people that care about this stuff would actually patronize those places more potentially, because they're making those kind of choices for their people.
No, that's an awesome idea. We have a list of retailers, but it's not the same. What you're saying is really cool. Bit of a treasure hunt. It's like, yep, I went to Gus's Diner in Brooklyn or whatever. And it
could be like a social media like party for people, like, found the plant paper.
Completely.
Like, I think it'd be kind of cool. I don't know. I'm here for it. I'd be all up on the website going, ooh, what places? Any places near me? I'd be so curious. Is there one question that people should ask before buying any product that they put on their body?
The broad question is, what are the ingredients and how is it made? That's the broad question. But I think the tricky part is that certain things like toilet paper, there's no ingredient list. The regulatory agencies don't require toilet paper to list the ingredients. But fortunately, with, most beauty products, soaps and so forth, you do get that information. And I think it's a difficult question to answer. Unfortunately, there's so many things that we should be trying to avoid. It's not easy to avoid them all. And that's a function of the fact that, like, the 20th century was like a chemical bonanza, like,
oh my gosh, yes.
This is what a lot of the 20th century was about, was like manipulating different elements, combining them with other elements to create chemicals with different properties. And we could do really extraordinary things and extraordinarily bad things as well that were not obvious to us from the outset. So I wish I could give you a more specific answer. I think it probably depends a lot on the category. We just learned, for example, and who's ever listening should 100% validate what I'm about to say, because this is really new information for me, and I haven't put the work in yet. But forever chemicals in Band-Aids. Our children are obsessed with using Band-Aids as a sort of like body art. They just cover themselves in Band-Aids. Like, it's just for fun. And we recently learned that, like, some of these Band-Aid brands have tested positive for PFAS. Again, that's just one among many things to worry about. Unfortunately, I wish I had like a better message, like, hey, you generally don't have to worry. But the reality is, I think like food first and foremost, like eating healthy food, probably the number one thing. But as far as what goes on your body, different categories use different things. And there's no really getting around having to do the work of researching pretty much anything that you're using on your body in a regular fashion. If you're doing it once every 6 months or something, like, okay, fine. But a lot of these things are daily rituals for us. So you should probably know exactly what goes into all of them, honestly.
Will this hurt me?
Exactly.
If it's like a blanket, is this trying to kill me? I don't know, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, like there's just no shortcut for the research. I know that there are a handful of like great apps that will evaluate products. You could take a screenshot or the UPC code, and I think those are great, and they do a lot of the work for you. But, you know, short of that, you're looking things up and you're trying to sort through research, and some of it's going to be misleading, you know, because with a lot of these things, we don't actually really know, you know, exactly what happens over the course of decades. You know, the way the regulatory framework is set up in the US is like, you're kind of innocent until proven guilty with a lot of this stuff. So obviously can't drive yourself crazy, but it's a part of where we're at in our sort of development as a species, as a society. You got to put the work in and try your best, you know?
And I do think it gets easier once it's just kind of a part of your DNA. You know what I mean? Like it's hard to start, but then once I think you've started and it illuminates itself in a way, you know, like.
I agree. And you start to understand what are the main things that you don't want to see, phthalates, whatever, sodium benzoate. There's like a few major recurring things, and you start to be aware of those, and nobody's going to be perfect. We don't have a perfectly clear understanding either of what's safe and what's not. So all we can do is put some effort into it and know that that's a lot better than no effort, you know?
100%. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Plant Paper was a part of the Target Accelerator. I don't remember what year you guys were a part of it, but
that was 2020. That was
it 2022? Wow. Oh my God. Oh, wow.
Crazy times.
Yeah. So what is maybe one insight that you took away from that program that still informs how you're running the business today?
I think there's two. The first is that from the standpoint of organizing your business, setting up your business, when we started, like I had no background in operations, no background in finance. None of the other co-founders did either. We were all really focused on product, all really focused on brand, all really focused on communication and messaging. We didn't think much about margins or finances or how any of that would work. Our focus in the first, you know, many months, how do we see if this is sticky? You know, how do we get it to enough people to prove the concept? And we'll deal with the margin stuff later. You know, we'll deal with the finances later. We'll deal with cash flow later. I didn't know the first thing about cash flow or why that was something to worry about, you know. And Target would like bring these things up on their calls with us. And I was like, I don't know what you're, you know, who cares? But by the end of that process, I understood, while I think there's value at the outset in being laser focused on product market fit, like, do people like this? Is there an audience? Do I think that audience is growing or can be grown? Certainly that is the number one thing. But like, as soon as you have a sort of inkling that that might be the case, it's not too early to start thinking about like, is there a version where the margins can work for a big box buyer like Target? Is there a version where operationally we could get to that point? And if you start thinking about those things from the beginning and sort of like laying the foundations to get there, not necessarily this year or next year or even the year after that, but at some point in the future, I think that can help you make better decisions early on. That's the sort of business side of things. And then in terms of branding, marketing, we were at that point redeveloping some of our packaging. We'd had like a first generation, and we started developing a second generation. Selling a product in a store in a big box context is very different from selling one online for the reasons I kind of said before. Right. And to be able to differentiate yourself from the shelf is like a real art. Big box is not a part of our business right now. Retail is, but it's not a big part. Honestly, what it taught us really is that we weren't ready for it at the time, that it requires a very thoughtful approach to making that transition into big box. That's really what the experience taught me. And that it's not something that you should do lightly. It's not something that you should do without being pretty well capitalized. It's expensive. Operationally, it's a big lift. And I think a lot of companies, frankly, probably try to make that transition prematurely. And I don't think that Target would be bothered by my saying that either, because they want their companies to succeed. And that's partly why that program exists, to sort of give them the training to do so. But it's a lot, and it's a different type of business than a direct-to-consumer business. You got to really know what you're signing up for and be well prepared.
I think that's super interesting in the sense of, even if it's not now, you kind of now have an understanding of what the requirements are, which a lot of people don't get that. So like, that's
Exactly.
helpful. The one product that came to mind that I feel like is now at Target is Branch Basics. I don't know when they launched, but the fact that they've figured out now how to reach the Target shelf, interesting. I wonder how many of like sort of the more natural companies, like what that timeline actually looks like.
Target is trying very hard to bring up more of those companies onto their shelves. And I think they do a good job. I couldn't believe that when they picked us out, we were like nothing. And they were like, hey, you want to be one of like 8 brands that participates in this program. They're clearly, trying very hard to identify great new brands. The wonderful thing about a direct-to-consumer business is it gives you the opportunity to learn and rehearse your messaging and learn your people.
Yeah.
You get into a Target, you get into a Walmart, like you don't get that much feedback from the people. Like complaints are going to Target. They're not necessarily going to you. And I think that is also another pitfall of maybe going there too early, which again, there are companies that are conceived from the get-go as big box brands, and there's a different story. But, for our trajectory and many other companies like us, you start as a direct consumer company because that is your channel directly to the heart and the mind of your customer. You learn a lot. And that hopefully, I think, sets you up to be able to make that transition more smoothly.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful thing too. You've said this somewhere, but it's a trade up, not a trade off product. And you're developing something that you would be proud to use, your family would be proud to use. When you say that, do you ever feel some tension between like what that ideal looks like and then obviously the practical pressures, the operational pressures, supply chain, sustainability decisions? So how do you navigate those moments?
The short answer is I really don't. If we're talking about trading up to a better level of quality, to a better wiping experience, to a better keeping my house stocked with toilet paper and not having to go out to the store and run out of toilet paper experience. If we're talking about how much packaging waste and is it plastic, the answer to all those things is it's a trade up in every way. Just speaking for myself, it's like that Just for Men's hair club commercial, like I'm not only the president, I'm also a user. Right. I love using plant paper. And whenever I go anywhere else, whenever I go on vacation, whatever, if I forget to pack it, which we often do, I'm like, this sucks. I miss my plant paper. When I come back home, I'm excited to use it. So no, I don't think it's trade-off in any way. I think it's better in every way. Now, that being said, certainly there are people out there who are really attached to their white paper. Certainly there are people out there who are really attached to the very particular way that the big premium white toilet paper brands feel, like dusty fluffiness that they have. Some people are really accustomed to that, and I can't tell them that they're wrong. But I know that for myself and for, many others of us, once you get used to the way plant paper feels, you're like, that's just a much more satisfying wipe. Like, I don't feel like I'm smearing anything around. I feel like I'm cleaning myself up. And I need to use less of it in order to do that. That's my personal subjective experience. I think, are there tensions? Yeah, I think that a lot of the tensions for us are around costing and pricing. Like plant paper is a little bit more expensive than the sort of quote leading tree paper brands. Not very much, a cup of coffee a month or something for the household at a fancy coffee place, of course. I wish that weren't the case. If price were absolutely no object to the consumer and we weren't thinking about that, there might be some things that we would change. We wouldn't add anything more to the product. Like we've already stripped it to its sort of simplest form. So in general, I think, when we talk about a trade up, not a trade off, like we're kind of saying that it's a false dichotomy between here's what's best for the planet and here's what's best for me. This logic that like you always have to be making trade-offs. Now, obviously, like when it comes big picture to environmental things, yeah, there are sometimes trade-offs, like the use of fertilizers, for example, in farming. things to do with electric vehicles. Like sometimes there are products or let's say habit shifts that create more difficulty, more resistance in the first weeks or months or years until they start paying their dividends. I
Right.
don't mean to say that that's not real. That is very real. And we all need to be realistic about that fact. That's the only way we're going to kind of evolve through this crucible moment right now. But when it
Right.
comes to toilet paper, it's not really a big deal. You're already buying toilet paper. You're already probably buying it in a super annoying way. Going to the store, filling your car, putting it in your truck, whatever. We're talking about something that is easier. We're
Right.
talking about something that from a cost perspective probably isn't going to really make much of a difference in your lifestyle at all. And we're
Right.
talking about something that is cleaner for your body, for the environment, and which maybe more than anything else, most people just think performs better. They like the way it feels. They like the way it works. So obviously you're asking somebody with a strong bias, but no, a trade up is a trade up. And that's how we think of it.
Do you think that when you're making decisions around like sustainability stuff, so like let's say tariff things are happening, because they are, like things in this nature, is your mind always going to be in the trade up frame?
Yep.
Or do you think that you'll ever need to sort of readjust with that sort of more biz ops lens and may have to trade off?
Somebody, somebody once told us early on that like a brand is defined by the one or two things that you will not compromise on.
Yes.
And obviously this is a high bar and a sort of a general area of non-compromise. But for us, it is putting the customer first and being absolutely transparent with the customer about why we're doing the things that we're doing. So
Mhm.
if it came to that, like, hey, we have to raise our prices, we would and have been as transparent as we can possibly be, like painstakingly so,
Mhm.
with our customers, with our subscribers.
Yeah.
If we were forced to start using another manufacturer, which we are very seriously considering right now for the first time, and we've put that decision off because there's a lot of pitfalls associated with doing that in terms of quality
Sure.
control. And for a
Mhm.
product like toilet paper, where people become very accustomed to how it looks and feels, any type of change is not necessarily going to be well tolerated. So if and when it comes to that, we will speak at length to the customer about why we've chosen to do that and why ultimately we see it not as a trade-off, but as something that is good for the business, good for the product, and ultimately good for the customer. Like those
Right.
things, we never want them to be at odds. Sometimes they can feel like they are, but I think it's a matter of just looking at it differently and understanding how they're not. They should all be facing in the same direction.
Yeah. As you've scaled the business, how have you thought about, a company where your team thrives? They're not just performing, but they're thriving. Are there certain things that you've done within the business, rituals, practices that help protect, I guess, internal wellness?
Well, our team is very, very, very small, minutely disproportionately small relative to the size of the business. That has its many, many benefits, but certain challenges associated with it as well. The majority of the team is founders, who are sort of already linked in this very important way. We certainly do biannual meetings of the core team. They're not exactly retreats because at least to date, we've not gone like to some farm or camping or anything like that. We've, met up in our backyard in New York City. For us, a lot of our work is remote. A few people that are on the team, with the exception of Diva and myself, live separately in different cities. And I think that, we've been able to accomplish a lot that way, but there's also something extraordinarily special about spending time together in person. And so making a point of doing that really as often as you can. We need that. It's critical for us to continue doing what we're doing.
Mhm.
But I think more than anything else, and I realize this is maybe a bit of a cop-out answer, but I think absolute transparency with our employees and with the people that we work with, even with our contractors. For us, transparency is how you communicate respect. If you
Yes.
don't have respect for somebody, you are willing to conceal things. You think you
Yes.
know better than they do. And if you are concealing things and think you know better than they do, then you're probably not respecting them in the way that you might think you do. that is probably the sort of core ethos of our business as a whole, because I also referred to transparency in relation to the customer,
Yeah.
but also internally. Like, how can we be very, very upfront with each other about what we're feeling, what we're needing, what our strengths and weaknesses are, and we certainly have our weaknesses, and being able to own up to them, I think has been the glue that has held us together, even through sort of crazy growth over the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that that's a great answer, because I do think when employees or team members are in a trusting relationship, that does foster internal wellness, because it
Yeah.
means that the people are not in some weird fight or flight sort of internal dialogue in their brains. It does make for more ease, more balance. So I think that's a great answer. Okay, what would go on your personal dean's list of non-negotiables? Any wellness habits, values, rituals that you refuse to compromise on in your life?
Spending some time each day with my kids.
Yes.
I didn't choose the way this sort of worked out, but here's how it worked out. From early on, after our first son was born, our two kids have been very, very early risers. Our son would wake up at like 4:30 in the morning. And after like keeping my wife awake all night, breastfeeding, whatever. And so it
Yeah.
sort of started falling to me very early on to be the early riser and like spend, whatever from in those days, like 4:30 to 7:30 or 8 o'clock with our son. And fortunately, he's, learned to sleep a bit later than that. But the arrangement has persisted where like I am the one who wakes up whenever they wake up. It's 5:30, it's 6, whatever. And I'm basically with them until 7:30 or 8. I get like a good hour and a half or 2 hours where it's just me and them. It used to just be me and my son. Now it's my two kids and myself. And at the end of the day, I get time with them, but not always. Sometimes I have meetings that run late. Sometimes I just can't be part of dinner or whatever. But that dedicated time, even though there are many instances, even every week, where I'm like, I really got to get started working this morning, like right away. When I don't do that, I don't feel good. It helps me keep things in perspective. Certain of the frustrations that arise dealing with your kids, by the time you sit down to your work, you're like, I can't wait to work. Like, now it's actually under my control,
Right.
Sorry if it's kind of a corny response, but like that is a very important grounding ritual for me.
I think it's a beautiful ritual. A lot of entrepreneurs and people in business, I would hope, would have a similar answer to you. So I think it's a great answer. All right. If you could write a letter to your pre-plant paper self, or offer some kind of advice to another founder trying to build something mission driven
Yep.
without losing themselves, what would this letter say?
I would say to myself that there are things that you believe that you're not capable of doing. There is an idea of yourself that you have. Here are your strengths and here are your weaknesses that in your mind is pretty fixed. And one day, pretty soon, you're going to be forced to do those things anyway, the things that you don't think you're good at. And it's not going to be easy. And you're going to fight it tooth and nail. You're going to resist with every fiber in your being to not do those things that are uncomfortable for you, those things that you think you are not great at doing, that there's got to be a million other people that could be better at doing that. But you'll have no choice because those other people won't materialize, or might not materialize on time. And so you'll do them and it'll be hard, and you'll do them some more and it'll still be hard. You'll do them some more and it'll start to be a little bit easier. And then one day, a couple of years later, you'll wake up and be like, I'm fucking good at this. Like, I can do this. And that will be a really amazing feeling. And I think that could be true of any business, whether mission driven or not, any founder. But I think especially in a mission driven business, where this isn't a fight that everybody is necessarily signing up to fight.
Right.
This isn't something that everybody else is like already working on and showing you how to do. Toilet paper is tricky because they're not going to produce 100 rolls for you. They're going to produce 50,000 minimum,
Mhm.
and then you got to pay for a whole container to move those, and then you got to store those. And there's a lot of like upfront moats around starting a toilet paper business. And
Mhm.
those will deter a lot of people who aren't in it for something more than just the money or whatever. All the more so in a mission-based business, a mission-driven business, you're going to have these situations where you think, I'm just not the person for this. And it's not to say that you're the person for everything. Like, there's going to be things where you need other people, absolutely. But I think pushing beyond your comfort zone, getting
Mm.
rid of that idea of like what you're basically good at and what you're basically not good at, that is a wonderful thing to force yourself through. And when you get to the other side of that, which is really just to say, when you get to the next phase of the same process again, it's a great feeling, and probably you'll have a lot to show for it in the business.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right, we're going to do a quick little thing I call extra credit. It's a few quick fire questions. So first thing that comes to mind, and then we're going to round this out, Lee. Are you an early bird? Well, I guess you're an early bird now. You're an early bird, not a night owl, right?
I wasn't, but when you have kids waking you up every morning, between 4:30 and 6:15 for 5 years, it kind of changes the schedule. And now I
Yeah.
can't even really sleep later if I wanted to.
There you go. Early bird now. What's your favorite music genre or favorite band or both?
I always come back to bossa nova music from Brazil, and specifically Caetano Veloso. That whole scene never gets old for me.
I love that. Okay, cool. What is a ritual that always grounds you?
A ritual that grounds me: cooking.
Cooking.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, what's one thing about the wellness industry or the sustainability world you'd love to leave behind?
This is going to sound maybe unfair because I'm kind of excluding our own product from the category, which it really it shouldn't be. A problem for me with the explosion of direct to consumer based brands and e-commerce based brands
Yes.
is a focus on the surface level at the expense of like, what is the product underneath it and how well does it work? Because we buy so much stuff online now, it's like it's all about the storytelling and the visuals and all these things. And all that stuff is great. But like, it has to be in the service of a great product. And that's not about the wellness industry specifically. I think a lot of companies are like doing their absolute best to make products that are truly good and truly superior. But,
Right.
I think that really going in deeply from the outset to the product, how do you start with that? Like, I don't want to know about what your brand is. I don't want to know what your packaging looks like until you have a formulation or something that is really, truly different and better that I want to use, and then work on, the rest of it.
Great answer. That's a great answer. And a few things just came to mind where I was like, yeah, what were they doing with that? If you weren't building what you're building with plant paper, what would you be creating?
My like three great passions are music and food and reading and writing. Something in one of those worlds, maybe. As far as businesses, we've got some interesting ideas for whatever might come next. Still percolating. I think it's going to be hard if and when we transition into something in the future. If that were to happen, I think it will probably be hard for me to not want to apply what we've learned to something else. We haven't decided exactly what that might be yet because we're not at that point yet. But it's pretty cool to think about having an opportunity to like apply all that again from the outset without having to go through like some of the really difficult learnings. But if it weren't that, I'd probably spend all my time eating and listening to music, playing music,
I
things
love
like
that.
that.
Okay. And what's one word for your entrepreneurial journey?
Gut wrenching.
Gut wrenching. Okay. That's a
Yeah. I
powerful
mean,
one.
I feel like my insides get totally twisted up. And then other days they're completely untwisted. And, I feel light and breezy and comes with the territory. But my gut maybe doesn't want to behave, but at least I try to keep my head on straight.
There you go. Keep your balance. Okay, Lee, how can everyone find plant paper?
People can find plant paper at plantpaper.us or plantpaper.ca if they're in Canada. And you can find us in many, many fine grocery and retail establishments. The list is actually on our website down at the bottom of the homepage. And you can find us on Instagram.
Okay, and then for everyone listening or watching, you can get 20% off your first order of a recurring subscription if you use the code The Dean's List. So that's awesome. Thank you to Lee and team for that.
And you can cancel anytime. There's no obligation.
Lee, thank you for being on the Dean's List. It was a delight to have you, and I think very informative for all of us.
Thank you, Allison. This was a blast. I really enjoyed our chat. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching this episode of The Dean's List, where we explore the art of building well. If you enjoyed this conversation, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, share it with a friend who'd love it too. I appreciate it. If you prefer to listen on the go, you'll find the full audio version wherever you get your podcasts. This community is all about building businesses and lives that feel good, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. I'm Allison Dean. I'll see you in the next one.